Do games have an accessibility problem? I know this sounds a little bit crazy, but imagine if it was physically impossible for you to play your favorite game. Playing games is easy, right? You just pick up the controller and you press start. But imagine if a physical disability prevented you from playing Smash Brothers or the Destiny beta or The Last of Us Remastered. That would suck. It's one of these things that no one really notices until it happens to you. After we finished our virtual reality episode, a bunch of you in the comments left notes about how disabilities hindered you from playing games. A commenter named Razmakotl wrote that he might not be able to use virtual reality because he only has one eye. In fact, with Wii Sports, he had to stand so close to the TV that he couldn't play because he didn't have space to swing his arms. And Joanna Roberts was concerned that because she can't walk and can't really use her arms, that games were just going to leave her behind. But in many cases, this could be a non-issue if the game's designers did things a tad bit differently. So this made me wonder, are games biased against the disabled? Okay, that's a bit of a softball lob. Yes, they are. But what do we mean when we say disabled? As it turns out, there's quite a broad range. When we say disability, we don't just mean people who can't move their arms and legs. In fact, according to the most recent statistics, there are currently more than 54 million non-institutionalized Americans who have a disability of some kind. But more importantly, unless you have some kind of superhuman genes or I don't know, you're immortal or something, we'll all be there someday because we're all going to get old. Arthritis is going to make using a keyboard and mouse sting with pain, and faltering eyesight is going to make the ultra-fine text on HD consoles even more impossible to read. As our viewer Evan Monod put it best, the disabled are an open-door minority. Anyone can join at any time. And while it might not be at the forefront of gamers or game designers' minds, this lack of features for the disabled means that lots and lots of people are getting a lot less video game fun time. Because come on, let's be honest, video games don't exactly have a perfect track record for being inclusive. So let's look at some of the ways this plays out. One very common disability is color blindness. Approximately 8% of all American males have it. And as Morgan behind the camera can tell you, being colorblind can make it really difficult to tell allies and enemies apart. I mean, running your teammates over with the Warthog, not exactly the way to make best friends online. Hearing is often a critical component of games, but hearing loss is also very common. Shooters like Battlefield rely on surround sound so you can hear where gunfire is coming from or whether someone is sneaking up behind you, but whether intentional or not, they're making it nearly impossible for someone with hearing loss to play the game effectively. Simply being in a wheelchair, which is more than 3 million people in the United States, creates all kinds of exclusions, like playing Fruit Ninja for the Xbox, or, I don't know, operating an arcade cabinet. Playing Pikmin 3 with a stylus is really hard if you're left-handed because Nintendo didn't include a lefty mode. Look, I know, being left-handed is not a disability, but it gives you some insight into how clueless game designers can be sometimes. The number of ways that people can be excluded from video games is huge. I could go on for another 20 minutes about it. But clearly, there is a problem. Now, I will grant that not every problem is solvable, but here's why we should care. Games are falling behind the rest of the world in terms of accessibility. In 2007, 98% of American public transit buses had wheelchair accessibility ramps. Every single television show has closed captioning, and our phones and our computers have a wide range of accessibility features such as alternative control options and Siri. Long story short, this has all been great for the disabled.
What do you look like?
Let's just say multi-dimensional.
If the rest of the world is making these changes, then why aren't there more options for disabled gamers? You might be thinking, a lot of these changes are going to be big and expensive. But they're not really. Look, it's a question of priorities. If video game companies can invest in NPCs whose pupils auto-dilate and open and close in the sunlight, or horses that poop in real time, then surely adding a host of accessibility features for those who want to play but can't is not an unreasonable ask. For starters, one huge problem is that people with a variety of disabilities such as muscular dystrophy, for example, can't use the controllers as they're originally designed. So it takes nonprofit organizations like Gamers to create amazing devices that remap the controls onto larger buttons that are easier to use. It's not incredibly complicated to ask game designers to include an option for remapping buttons. Then these controllers wouldn't be so hard or expensive to make, and in some cases wouldn't even be necessary.
And set across the screen to start game, raise your hands above your head. it didn't work.
Another problem with a relatively easy fix is that there aren't difficulty settings for the disabled. Players with eyesight problems need markers to highlight enemies. Players with hearing problems need visual cues. And players with reduced motor skills need macros to help them complete complex button inputs. Sadly, these will probably be abused by non-disabled gamers. In most online games, these hacks are actually banned because cheaters use them to farm gold or to spy on other people through walls. But there is a middle ground. Companies like Valve get accessibility right. Left 4 Dead 2, for example, is a godsend for the disabled. It has a host of features like colorblind mode, easy mode, remappable buttons, and subtitles. On top of all this, it's a multiplayer game, so you can play with your friends. But we need more game developers following Valve's lead, starting with the big boys, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, who could incorporate some of these features without too much additional cost. I mean, able gamers will consult with you for free. Am I suggesting that game designers hold back so that everyone can play? Of course not. In fact, some differently able gamers would probably crush you if given the chance. I mean, look at this League of Legends player, Aaron, who got a pentakill with no hands.
Oh, that's my first pentakill like ever.
What I'm asking for are options that let everyone join in the fun. The medium shines brightest when it's open to all. I mean, come on, let's be honest. One reason that we play games is because they allow us to do things that we can't do in real life, whether it's throw an 80-yard Hail Mary in Madden or skydive from a bus in GTA 5. We're all in the same boat. None of us are gonna scale a mountain like Nathan Drake. And besides, I look forward to playing games all day when I retire. I better be able to at least zoom in on that pesky text in my virtual reality holodeck. So what do you think? Do games have an accessibility problem? Have you ever faced some of the problems that I talked about in this episode? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. And also a big thank you to Evan Manad and some of the other commenters and viewers who inspired and helped with this episode. I'll see you next week. Last week we talked about the military's secret history in games. Let's see what you had to say. Kazis shares a conspiracy theory, it was one I was unfamiliar with, about high school. Specifically, this theory stipulates that perhaps the federal government deployed shows like Law and Order, basically crime procedurals, to attract kids who might have high levels of detective skills and then, I don't know, turn them into the next Batman or Professor Layton or whatever. I don't know if that's true or false. I suspect it's probably false, as most high school theories actually are. But your question was about whether or not playing military games, shooters like Call of Duty, could prepare someone for a life of military service. And that's certainly the bet that America's Army was making. That was the game that I mentioned in the video that was funded by the US military and uses the same technology as titles like Gears of War. That was the bet that they were making, that playing that game would sort of attract certain types of people who might make good soldiers. As to whether or not games like Call of Duty are being actively deployed in high schools to create good soldiers, I don't know. I guess that's TBD. Jeff Gibbons is a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that drone warfare is kind of like playing a video game, and makes the excellent point that part of the history of military technology has been one of detachment. So you went from, using a sword where you had to look someone in the eye before you killed them, to using guns, to using machine guns, which created more efficient detachment, to drone warfare today, where you can be on the other side of the planet piloting a drone and killing people. As it turns out, that detachment is not just problematic for people like you and me, but it's problematic for the soldiers themselves, and it wreaks psychological havoc on them because they don't have that same kind of connection with someone that they're killing. So they're actually, my understanding is that they're actually moving more drone pilots to active war zones to sort of put them in the place of combat rather than in some facility in the Midwest somewhere. Daniel Rowley jokes that the United States invented the internet to best the Russians, which is basically every game of civilization he's ever played. Well put. Craven THC and a few others commented on the fact that some of the things I talked about in the episode weren't really secrets, and that they were things that were already known. Well, I think part of it is that some of you were expecting secrets in military, and anytime you use those two words in the same sentence, you get the expectation of like Captain America or like the Blackbird, and unfortunately the episode featured none of those revelations. Nonetheless, there were lots of you who had no idea about the connection between the military and video games. So to Craven and the few others of you, I don't know, you're just like ahead of the curve or something. Dennis Fluttershy, who's a little bit concerned about the way I ended the last episode's comment. Specifically, I was sort of joking that PBS Game Show was a big middle finger to my parents. So first of all, I do appreciate your concern in defending my parents' decisions. That's a very serious thing. I do really appreciate that a lot. And it's worth noting that my parents do watch the show. And actually, it's funny because I didn't grow up playing video games, but I did end up playing video games later on with my dad when we would get to rent things from Blockbuster over the weekend. And my father was someone who actively believed that parents should play games with their kids rather than just sort of giving them game consoles and letting them walk away. But Dennis, I do appreciate the concern, and yeah, my folks are pretty pleased that I'm doing this. The Sweet Court postulates that the government is the reason that Half-Life 3 is still unconfirmed. It's really interesting because I did a bunch of research, which I have right here. It didn't make it into the episode, but I believe that there's a long-running conspiracy, a pact, if you will, between Valve and the US government with regards to Half-Life 3. Here, let me read this to you.